Hello, my name is Nicole Mann. I will be summarizing Chapter 9 in the Radical Behaviorism for ABA Practitioners book by Dr. James M. Johnston, which is titled A Social Life. Here's the book. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this book. Please let me first start out by saying that this chapter's title really got my attention. The chapter starts off with a scenario, which I've stated in my last review, that I love scenarios within textbooks because they add a real life perspective to the reading, and for me, makes the reading that follow easier to understand. The scenario discussed a behavior professional working with a teenage boy who had an intellectual disability or disabilities, also known as ID, and received special education services through the public school system. Apparently, the behavior professional had been assigned through the behavior professional's agency to work with the boy to address exhibiting behavioral challenges such as destruction, aggressiveness when the boy does not get his way, and the boy not following requests asked by others. After observations of the boy's home life, the behavior professional realized that the boy's siblings share the same behaviors as the boy. Home visits revealed to the behavior professional that the children in the home were being physically punished for misbehaviors. The behavior professional's observations indicated that the boys exhibiting behaviors were not only a result of the parents' lack of early intervention, but were elicited by the parents' stance on consequences being physical. The behavior professional came to the realization that in order to assist with changing the boys exhibiting behaviors, the behavior professional would have to find a way to alter aggressive tendencies within the family's cultural dynamic. All right, so the first main point in this chapter is titled Culture. This section of the chapter discusses culture's free tendencies. The author points out in this section how we all take part in contingencies and how humans partaking in contingencies is a natural phenomenon. This section describes non-social contingencies, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, but from my understanding, a non-social contingency is doing something without the help of someone else. The following main point was titled Add the Influence of Culture, which discuss how our social environment influences our behavior, which ultimately becomes our culture. From my understanding of the reading, our culture is anything that has an effect on a person that involves others. The author discussed our social environment's role on culture and how our verbal repertoire is noticed. The author suggests that our behaviors are a result of our verbal capacity and how we adapt our behaviors according to particular social groups that we are around. From my understanding of this point of view, we tend to avoid behaviors that aren't deemed socially acceptable according to who is around. The concept of natural selection was pointed out in this week's reading as well. This concept was observed by B.F. Skinner. My apologies with this, but I had a challenging time understanding this particular explanation from Skinner. So if I'm explaining this incorrectly, please jump in and help me with this. According to my understanding of the text, Skinner indicates that there are a few ways that natural selection marks behavior. From my understanding, the first selection involves contingencies within the environment. Second, selection is the reinforcing contingency, and the third selection consists of contingencies that maintain the environment. Again, this is my understanding of the natural selection process. I'm surely not an expert, so please comment if you have another explanation. Johnson explains the necessary foundations of cultural practices: variation, transmission, and selection. Variation, when engaging in behaviors, may look a little different from time to time. With transmission, an easy way I try to understand this concept is to use the word imitation. We tend to imitate behaviors that are frequently reinforced. Cultural practices are selected according to behavior outcomes. In Chapter 9, Johnston warns that if we use the words phylogeny, and ontogeny, phylogeny, and ontogeny, we should know how to explain the terms and also how to say them. I'll attempt to try and explain these terms. From my understanding, phylogeny is the ability to do things that we were naturally or innately born to do. Ontogeny is behaviors that we learn during our lifetime. The terms proximate and ultimate reinforcers were explained in Chapter 9 when Johnson discussed social reinforcement. My review of proximate reinforcer is behaving in a socially appropriate way and being praised for it, while ultimate reinforcers have more to do with the environment. For example, being praised for picking glass up off the ground. Ultimately, hence the word, the praise was really towards the glass being picked up, and so now others may not get hurt. Johnson explores the role of behavioral science in figuring out the significance of cultural practices and its effects on behavior. The author advises that counter-control should go unprovoked. Counter-control, as I understand, is controlled by the environment, almost like treating someone in the same manner as the person treats you. I know we've all kind of heard of the do unto others as you want done to you. That's kind of the way that I understood counter control. But again, please, if I'm mistaken by this, please jump in and help me with this. But for example, so I was thinking an example of this would be if someone says hi to me, naturally in response, I'm prompted to say hi or hello back to that person. And so that's just the way that I understood it. Now let's discuss cultural engineering, which was also discussed in Chapter 9. From what I gather from the text, cultural engineering is used to refer to the changes that takes place within a person's cultural repertoire and the person's ability to acclimate to the changes. So the book gave an example of someone working and being new to a work environment and having to acclimate to that new work environment's way of culture, doing things differently. We see this often if we change schools, going to a different school, things may be different in one school from the next. So just altering our behaviors to acclimate with the new school's environment. So that's kind of how I understood cultural engineering. Again, with this one as well, if you guys have a better explanation, please chime in and help with this. My takeaway from Chapter 9 is that verbal communities have an effect on culture. Culture is not dependent on where you were born or where you are from, which is what we often think of when we think of cultures. But this chapter really talked in depth about cultures, and that it's not just like where you're born or where you're from, but it actually has a lot to do with the behaviors that we have learned along our lifespan or along our lifetime. So it is learned behaviors that make up culture. I have our discussion question for this week, and this discussion question that I'm going to ask is, would you agree that we are all controlled by contingencies? Why or why not? And this is a good one, because I often hear parents, talk about, when they talk about ABA, they kind of allude to the fact that we are bribing children to do the things that we, ask them to do. And then it's our job to explain how these are contingencies and how contingencies work. So again, our discussion question for this week: would you agree that we are all controlled by contingencies? Why or why not? Thank you guys for listening to my presentation, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thanks again.